Believe we are live now.
Oh, yep, there we are. We're over
I know
here as
you're
well.
very happy with it. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Sock It To Me. This is, I think it's our fourth or fifth show, and we've certainly had a lot of fun. I don't know, math's not my thing, but let's just say ballpark. Um, I am here with two of my favorite people, Mr. Mike Pedrick, who's our VP of Cybersecurity Consulting, and Mr. Chris with his yodeling pickle. Chris is our chief strategy executive and evangelist. Oh, he also has a hamster because we take things very seriously. So first, before we dive in, we're going to talk about RMISC. All three of us were there, and we wanted to chat a little bit about conversations we heard, the trends, all of that jazz. But first, we did want to say, and you may have seen our post yesterday, I believe, on LinkedIn. So one of the big things at RMISC were these shirts we gave out, and you're like, why is this exciting? That's not the exciting part. So I'm going to do a little turny turn. Can you guys see that? Can you see it?
There you go.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, we're there. Pretty good.
So it's patch your SH exclamation point T, because I never say curse words. And they were incredibly popular, and people were asking us, how do we get more of these? These are awesome. And so we thought we would give one away in today's show. So basically all you got to do is engage on the chat. Pretty easy. And then we'll do a random raffle, I believe, during this show. And so we'll be able to announce who gets it, and we'll get your size and everything at the end. So anyway, excited about that. So why don't we just kind of jump right into it? So are there any kind of initial thoughts that you guys have around RMISC? Like any kind of top level things before we jump into some of the presentations you guys did?
Go for it, Mike.
Well, I'm always excited about RMISC. I still think of it as the premier conference for the Denver area, the premier information security conference. But I think I noted this on a post on LinkedIn recently that, gosh, it's become the privacy and AI and compliance and risk conference. It's not just information security. In fact, I would hazard a guess that if you made a pie chart of all the subjects that were presented on this year, information security would be the smallest slice of that pie. And I'm very excited about that. I think that's very, very cool. There's a number of ways that folks can spend their conference attendance budgets in the Denver area, and I think RMISC should continue to be a fixture for folks.
Chris, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was interesting. Some fantastic conversations this year. You know what? I think the highlight for me, Gene Spafford. Spaff is a dear personal friend, known him for more years than I probably should admit. And it was so good to see him there. And he and I had a fantastic conversation. But it was interesting because in the middle of the conversation he and I were talking about, somebody came up and approached him and wanted to have a conversation about how to fix the internet. And they had, and it was somebody with a wealth of experience, or let me rephrase this, a wealth of years in our industry. And they came at the conversation and they came at Spaff with very much a focus on, well, we need more regulation, we need this, and we need to do this. And Spaff and I kind of looked at each other and said, no, we have enough regulation. We have enough. If people would adhere to it in the spirit rather than to the letter, we'd be in a better place. And, the collaboration. And it was really interesting because Spaff and I were taking much more of like a human approach to things. Whereas this individual is very much more, not necessarily on the technology, but very much more the compliance and the regulatory side of it. And nothing's going to work if we can't get the big companies like the Microsofts and the Palos and the Ciscos and the Sentinel ones and all those others to collaborate, or even to go against each other with a common goal kind of thing. And I'm like, that doesn't seem to have worked in our industry since we started the darn thing. What has worked and what I still see work is things like this. Is where we get people from various backgrounds, from different ideas, to come together and go, hey, what two or three things do we really want to focus on? So
Yeah, I saw that too. I think it was very interesting. So I attended, Chris, your IR incident response workshop, and
Mm,
it was great. And I thought it was interesting because you were able to do, I believe, 3 or 4 scenarios in the time of 3 hours, right?
yep.
And so I think there's people often think that if I'm gonna do a simulation, it needs to be this big production, and I only have time for one, and I got to get all these people together. But you showed a way to do it that's repeatable, easy to do. So I'm curious, and I'm glad your pickles are here to affirm what I'm saying. I'm curious. I'm curious, like what you noticed, or any things that you want to share around that one, because it seems to me that incident response has been around for quite some time, but there's this renewed interest in it.
Yeah, I mean, for a bunch of different reasons. I think first and foremost is if you look at incident response and tabletop exercises, they are a really nice, quick, and easy way to collaborate, to communicate, and to cooperate with other teams. It's almost a forced function. No one person can put out the fire inside an organization, so it takes that team. And so, if you run a tabletop and you do it effectively, then you can actually have some fun. And effectively being no blame game, collaboration, everything else. I mean, Mike and I tread these things on an almost daily basis. So I think what it was nice for people to see was that this isn't about technology very often. Yes, there has to be a component in there. It's about the human aspect. It's about how do we communicate? How do we collaborate? I think there's also a big part of a tabletop exercise and incident response, which is all about awareness. The one of the fundamental questions: if you don't know what you have, how the hell do you protect it? So that takes that step back and goes, again, it's a Nuspire shout out when you think about it. We go in with an MSSP type environment. We put things in and we help people understand what the heck their systems look like and how their baseline is, what's an anomaly, and all these other things that people typically don't have a good awareness of. So it opened people's eyes that this doesn't have to be necessarily complex, that you can start somewhere, that you don't have to wait, the paralysis analysis kind of mentality, and that you can sit down over a lunch break with tea, coffee and donuts or whatever, and just do something. I think it was eye-opening for a few folks.
I noticed everybody seemed really engaged in it, and it was accessible. I think that's the thing, because I know, Mike, you've attended some exercises that are much more of a production, and they're very expensive, sometimes in the 6 figures. But it doesn't, which is not very accessible unless you're a much larger organization. But it doesn't mean you have to do that to do it right. There are lots of other ways you can do it. And I guess that wasn't really a question, but I was just
That's okay.
making a
No,
nod.
for sure. No, I would agree. There's a number of different ways to do an incident response simulation, right? You can do just table reads. You can do, tabletop exercises that are scenario based, like what Nuspire offers. There's also full bore simulations, right? And I should say that there are, for the rare few, there's the opportunity for somebody to actually disrupt operations. And I'm always I've never watched the show, but I was introduced to the clip from The Office where one of the characters initiates a simulation where he actually puts the office into chaos. And at one point, somebody throws a chair through a window and jumps out the window. And I usually have to tell my students when I'm talking about incident response simulations that if you're going to do that, and I'd like to see people do it, at least make sure that the person who signs off on your paychecks is aware it's about to happen, because it could be a career redirecting event.
Good point. Chris, this was kind of a last minute thing, but you presented the following day on threat intelligence, the evolution of it, tracking your boss for profit. What is it? Tracking your boss for fun, profit
yes,
and protection.
Yes.
So how did that go?
I think it was another one of those. It was a fun one. And to your point, it was one of those last minute, it's like any time at a conference, sometimes people can't get there, travel gets in the way, work gets in the way. So I was on the reserve list and got a phone call about a week and a half ago saying, hey, any chance I can do it? And I'm like, oh, heck yeah. Thankfully, Ham and I had actually put the talk together for another conference in Chicago a couple of weeks ago, so had most of the slides. But it was fun because, I mean, it challenged how we look at threat intelligence. It challenged what we use it for. It challenged the validity of quite a number of those intelligence feeds out there in the organizations that are, selling them and all that side of it. And the hope and a lot of people came up afterwards and said, "Hey, can we have all the questions?" I'm like, "Absolutely." It was trying to give people more awareness, more understanding as to what actionable intelligence really is, that
Yeah.
data information intelligence, and how to get it, the questions to ask organizations, the usefulness of it inside an organization, not just as a remediation step or not just as a preventative step, but to get more proactive, to actually go out and help a business, mergers and acquisitions or any of that kind of stuff, geopolitical side of things, how you can actually use it to be much more effective, not just in your job, but the organization as a whole. So it was kind of turning the tables into a, hey, this is a periphery thing, into something like, hey, you could actually use this as a core tool if you get the right tech in, if you put the right controls in place, if you ask the right questions, and you put some time and effort into it.
For sure. Mike, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think the notion of leveraging what we have in front of us, I think is something we don't talk a lot about. We're always looking for what is the new shiny, what's the latest and greatest methodology or tooling, and most importantly, how can I inject AI into whatever that thing is. Um, so I think leveraging the tools that we have available to us to maximum effect I think it's a great message. It's a message I fully support.
So, oh, go ahead, Chris.
Funny you should say artificial intelligence. I can't remember. I think it was actually the workshop. It might have been the other one. I challenged everybody in the audience to go look at all the companies that were actually on display in the vendor area, and there were quite a few folks there, and find who wasn't mentioning AI and didn't have it splashed across their banners. And they came back, they're like, "All right, smartass, it's you." I'm like, we don't want to make a big thing of it. We do it, we use it. It's a tool that helps us to accomplish things. It is not the be all and end all.
That's right. That's a good point. So, Mike, your
Yes.
passion, your true passion in life,
Mm.
besides cars, is
Yeah.
privacy legislation. So, how did that go? Because you definitely have a strong opinion. Which
I do. I took my audience through a bit of a journey. I explained in very briefly GDPR and some of the legislation that's been signed here in the States at the state level, 16, 18, very nearly 19 states have signed individual state level legislation that mimics in some fashion GDPR. And then I talked them through my journey sending a DSR, a data subject request, to a major data broker, one of the more famous data brokers, and why that was akin to mail-in rebates, right? No hint of a lie there. And why I think though that legislation is going to continue to fail. And I tried to make it entertaining. I managed to include a reference to Erasure, the band, and it was a very very entertaining, at least from where I was on the stage, presentation. Well attended, and I think anyway. To spoiler alert, the messaging is that in the EU, the data subject owns their data unequivocally and without question. And here in the US, all of our legislation steps right over that question. And there's a very real perpendicularity of purpose between the notion of the data subject owning their data and the idea that corporations also have the right to the First Amendment. And so it was a fairly heavy topic for a Thursday morning, bright and fresh at 9:45. But I think it was a good presentation.
what did people like? What did they say who attended? Like, what were the conversations?
I took this as an extreme compliment. There was an attorney in attendance who said, "Mike, I do this for a living, and every time I talk to you, you scare me." So I will take that as the highest form of flattery. That's all absolutely incredible.
Well, and speaking of attorneys, you said this year was the year where you saw the most practicing attorneys in attendance. And so, what does that say?
I think what that tells me, I've had conversations with folks that if you had to choose between getting an attorney to be technologically savvy versus getting technology practitioners to be aware of the regulatory landscape, what would be the path of least resistance? And most attorneys will tell me there's no way in hell you're going to get a lawyer to be technically savvy. It's just not going to be a thing. And so I was very heartened by the fact that there were so many attorneys, so many just fantastic attorneys in attendance at RMISC, some of whom I'm always delighted to interface with when I get a chance to talk to them. And I think what this is it's the intersection between compliance and changing the changing regulatory landscape and what we do. We are all risk practitioners. Some of us are analysts and CISOs and pick a title, but realistically speaking, we are all risk practitioners, and there's a tremendous overlap between risk management and the law. So I'm excited to see lawyers in attendance at these events. I'm not scared of them. They don't scare me.
Chris, do they scare you?
It depends. I mean, there are some absolutely fantastic ones out there. Yeah, I think it depends. It depends if I'm being yelled at which point, you always find a good one to help you. There are, unfortunately, some out there that are, like any other industry, too big for their boots would be an English saying on that one. And I have no time or love for them. There are some that are out there to do nothing more than chase ambulances and make a name for themselves. But there are also some very, very good ones out there. And again, like Mike, I had a couple of folks in my audience who were also lawyers, self-identified. They actually identified themselves blessed on SOCs. And they asked and they watched and they made lots of notes. And I think, to Mike's point, it's heartening to see that occurring. And I really, really like it. Now, what I would love is for more of us to go to more. We always talk about this, stepping outside of our own pond, sandbox, whatever you want to call it. I think more of us need to be out in doing more things outside of our own environments.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so let's talk about some of the top topics. We talked a little bit about regulatory, but why don't we talk about AI, since that, not to sound rote, but it is something that everybody was talking about. And so I'm curious what you guys heard, what were people saying around AI? Because like Chris, you said, you saw lots of booths and stuff touting their AI solution or whatever, but what else?
For me, one of the most telling things was I talked to a couple of the vendors and I took the level of anonymity that I possibly can get away with. I talked to a couple of the vendors and I'm asking them, what do they have and what's it doing? And they're like, wow, you're asking questions. I'm like, yeah. They're like, and what they said was most people who come up and are vetting their product maybe ask one or two questions. So people are taking it at face value. They're taking artificial intelligence at face value. They might ask, is it narrow, general? Is it generative? Is it whatever? They might not even understand what the answer is. But people don't seem to be understanding the other 15 questions that we all should be asking for anybody that says, hey, I have AI. And I think that's where, to me, some of the biggest dangers are. It's not about the technology going rogue. It's simply about the fact that we're putting things in place that we simply don't understand.
Yeah. Mike, you've done a lot on AI. I'm curious what you chatted. Yeah.
So, well, and actually, I want to reference a different context if I can. I chair a AI governance group. We're trying to pull together recommendations for that particular industry, and every conversation that we have circles back to the notion that when we say the phrase AI governance, really we're talking about data governance, right? Mm-hmm. Which is now it's not a new topic; it's the same topic we've been having for decades at this point. And so I think that to the extent possible, when we have conversations with vendors regarding AI, some of the questions we should be asking is like, how are you controlling the quality and the flow of data through that AI model, right? I had a conversation, I think probably December of last year, about the idea of the intersection between privacy DSRs even, right? I want you to delete all of my data. If my data can be removed from an AI model without impacting the AI model, you didn't need it to train that model anyway. And we know that's not the case. And so I think having those conversations around what are we using the data for? How are we using it to train the model? And are we in control over what goes in there? One of the greatest things I heard out of the conversation I just came out of earlier today was that organizations are going to start having a BYO AI policy to govern the use of AI that we don't bring as corporations to the table, but our employees have on their devices. And that's mind expanding from a subject perspective.
So like kind of BYOD, but like okay.
Yeah, I mean we're worried about people bringing in their iPhones. Like, what can this iPhone do on our network? Or the example I drew was we often have conversations with companies about, are you able to identify when somebody brings in a rogue wireless access point? As though somebody like brings in a Linksys WRT54G and plants it on your network for the express purpose of giving Wi-Fi to things. That's in frameworks, that's in standards, et cetera, and it's not happening. But what is happening is a percentage of the workforce is walking around with ChatGPT on the same device as they have Outlook and they have whatever else. And it's academic for them to take data from a controlled environment and put it into an uncontrolled environment. Super easy, barely an inconvenience.
And that's the problem. It is super easy. It doesn't matter if you've got a policy or a control in place, it's still going to happen. It's back to that education. And Mike, to your point, I'm looking at the questions, and I'm actually going to be putting the slides that I'm putting out for the two talks. I reference the AI questions. The big one for me, coming from the adversary and attacker standpoint, it's another avenue I can use to manipulate your organization, because I come at it from like the adversarial AI side of it. I mean, that's part of my bread and butter as to what I've done, which is, here's your model. How do I inject? How do I break it? How do I bypass the controls if you have anything in place? How do I basically start to poison the data and use your model against you? I mean, there have been numerous very public examples of that happening on social media. There have been some less publicly stated ones used against healthcare and medical devices where incorrect information has been injected in. I run an insulin system, and you start injecting the wrong data into that, it's now telling me I've got to give myself an insulin injection, which now kills me. Not good, etc., 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 etc. So we're not paying attention to how we use the data that we have, let alone what the data is we're feeding it. To Mike's point, let alone who's managing, controlling it, who has access to it, how often is the data being refreshed, and what the modeling is, and all the other stupid things that we have with it. So it's I wouldn't say it's the wild, wild west out there, but it certainly is uncharted territories.
There's definitely a lot of value in it. Like, I use it a lot, to get ideas and help organize stuff. But I've had AI hallucination issues where, I was pulling together transcripts for a video, and I said, put quotes from transcripts into this order, find the quotes that best fit this subject. And it sent me quotes, and I was like, fantastic. These are great quotes. They were not from the transcripts at all. They took the transcripts, they summarized it, and then I didn't find out until after we were in production. And it happens a lot. And so it's like, how do we make sure that we're not getting fed stuff that the AI, model creates based on the data that you've provided it? Makes up. Mike, you've talked about lawyers who...
It goes back to threat intelligence. So it comes all the way back to this one. I gave an example while I was up on stage. I gave everybody, there was a website that's out there that you give it a 15-second clip of yourself, and it will generate a video version and audible version of you. And that's it, 15 seconds. So we've been out here talking for 30 minutes. If somebody wants to do that, there's a virtual me spouting off that users are a pain in the bum, and I don't want to deal with technology anymore, and I'm going to go off and raise koalas in Tasmania. How do you validate, then considerably trust if that's me or not me? What do we do?
Yeah, I think there's different levels of knowledge people have around AI too. I think sometimes I make assumptions that they at least know how to query, right? No, there are people who have no idea. Not that I'm
Mm-mm.
saying that the folks that may be watching this don't know how to do it, but it's like there's different levels and we have to account for that. There needs to be a lot more education.
Well, it's also, I mean, think about it. You and I ask Google the same question, we will both get different answers
Yeah.
because of our history, because of our internet service provider and what they
Hmm.
are filtering, not filtering, providing, doing, because of all the ads and everything else that's served up to us. We won't get consistency. Now, the question then becomes one of, and we've seen this, you're able to turn an AI engine bigoted and racist inside 24 hours, let alone even sooner. So, will this further narrow down people's views based off of an assumption that a machine has gotten about us, therefore needs to feed us the same type of data?
Yeah. Question from Alexandra Nicoli. I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
Do you think AI will require more security professionals, or do you think AI will replace security professionals? Mike,
I don't think we're going
Chris?
to be replaced by AI, if I'm honest. I also don't know that I think it's going to require more security professionals per se. I think it is going to require more um, administration.
Mhm.
There's a connotation to me using that word. It's not what I think it is. I think if nothing else, we're going to need more data scientists. We're going to need more business intelligence folks. We're going
Yeah.
to need more, analytics folks, right? I think that the concern around whether or not AI takes jobs away from information security professionals is not altogether unfounded, but like I don't think that's a particular concern. We're guarding the material going into the grinder as well as what's coming out of it, and AI is that particular grinder. So I'm not worried yet. But listen, we've had decades now where people have said XYZ was going to take our jobs, and
Yeah.
every generation has different job titles, right? If you had told, the people that raised me that YouTuber was a very real and actually lucrative gig, they'd have looked at you like you had three heads.
So we have another question. I know we've kind of gone
I'm,
off for.
I'm answering some of them online. There's
Oh,
actually
you
some
are.
really
You
fun.
are.
Yeah. I like the one ChatGPT is like using a browser search. Adam's hit that one's actually kind of a fun one. To me, it's interesting because the challenge with any of this stuff is we are handing over our data. We're handing over our preferences, exactly as Mike referenced. I'm sitting inside an organization and maybe I hand over a piece of the jigsaw. Francie, you decide you want to hand over some other information to get references. You hand over another piece of the jigsaw. The question then becomes how many pieces of that jigsaw are now out there about the organization that somebody can make an inference on? If all of a sudden we start looking for financial stuff or we start looking for different countries worth of stuff, can somebody infer that we're doing mergers and acquisitions with a company over in Tasmania or any of this kind of stuff? So it really starts getting interesting, especially if somebody is using an autonomous system to actually gather that. To Mike's point, I think what will happen is an intelligence, an augmented intelligence, will help us sift through the data more effectively
Yes.
and help provide us with better deterministic stuff. So we've seen it before. I mean, we had the early days of this with SOAR, security orchestration technology, disparate bits of data to help us basically build a picture as to what's going on our network. Now, I don't know any company that's trusted SOAR to make automatic firewall changes or to knock somebody off the network. Most companies are like, well, I want to put a human in place to make sure that it's making the right decision. And well, that's great, but at what point will you trust that technology? And at what point will somebody say, well, we're going to take all the tier one and tier two stuff? And to Mike and yours point, those people will now become basically data scientists, and we will have to train them on positive, negative, and all the other fun stuff to do with data.
So I know we're bumping up on time. Clearly, this is a topic we're going to talk more about because it's one we can dive into. But I mean, it's funny. A year ago at RMISC, nobody was talking about it really, and then a year later, it's like it's on the lips of everybody. And I think it's moving fast, and people are trying to figure out how to harness the power of it without doing dangerous things or getting in trouble. And So I think that's something, guys, we'll talk about maybe in the next one. But I do want to, there's a couple things I want to accomplish first. We talked a little bit about IR. Chris said he's working on the deck that he presented, and we'll make that available. But also we did a webinar series, and it's all on demand now, so we can post the links. We did 2 parts. It was us 3 again. I was more of just keeping Mike and Chris in line. I don't know if I succeeded, quite frankly, but I did my level best. And then we also have a checklist that we gave out at Chris's workshop, so we'll provide a link to that. We do have another Socket to Me next Tuesday, so we'll talk. Maybe we talk more AI stuff, because it sounds like this is a pretty hot topic. We already have a ton of questions, and I think that's something we might want to dig into more. And I know we're going to have Josh Smith, who authors our threat report. He's going to be joining us next week. Josh has done a ton of research into AI and how threat actors are leveraging it, so he can come in from that angle. So I think that could be a really good conversation. And then the t-shirt. So are we announcing? I'm looking at my feeds.
Yeah,
I've got
Shannon said who won it.
Shannon, do we have a winner yet?
Shannon said.
And if not, what we can do is just reach out on LinkedIn if we're still working on that. I'm hearing
Shannon put it. Do you want me to say who it was, or we'll hold it?
Oh, she did. Where?
All right. LinkedIn Live Legion.
Oh, she put it in a different chat, guys.
I don't know.
We are so well organized.
Chris, do you want to announce it since you knew where it was?
Okay, yeah.
Oh, Adam, she just put it in the chat. She stole our thunder. It's Adam Roth.
Yeah. Oh, she did. Bless her. That's awesome. She rocks.
She said it first.
Awesome.
Okay. Adam's like, I didn't know there was a contest. Adam, you should have joined us at the beginning, because you get this shirt.
Yeah, that specific shirt.
This specific shirt. So, okay, well, we're going to wrap this up. So next week, maybe we plan on talking about AI. Mike, unfortunately, will not be able to join us because he's apparently got something more important to do, which I find hard to believe, because we are obviously the most important.
This is the reason we had the pickles. The pickles will next week. Now the pickles have spent a week being trained. They have actually been listening for the entire week. And like Siri, they are now effectively trained as well as Siri is, and can respond accordingly. So I look forward to our overlords coming ahead with us and taking over the show next week.
Pickle overlords? Yeah.
Oh, good Lord. Mike, maybe you should be worried about AI taking over your job, because these pickles are coming in hot. So, okay.
Yeah, no, yeah.
So with that said, thank you so much for joining us. I know we went a few minutes over, but I think it was a really good conversation. We kind of veered off a little bit, but I think AI is going to be a big topic, and I think it's important to cover it. So, and you know how to reach us. We put tons of links in the chat. But until next time, we really appreciate all of you joining us. Have a good one.